Hello, I'm Sonia Ellison, and I'll be presenting the work from my master's thesis in geology here at Mines. My advisor is Yvette Kuiper, and we collaborated with Jim Crowley from Boise State and Dan Murray from the University of Rhode Island. The research area for my project, outlined in black, is currently interpreted to be the southeastern New England Avalon terrane. This is part of the microcontinent of Avalonia, shown on the map here in orange, all the way up into Canada. This microcontinent rifted from the supercontinent of Gondwana in the early Paleozoic and accreted to Laurentia, which is shown here in blue, during the middle Paleozoic Acadian orogeny, one of the mountain building events to form the Appalachians. During the ensuing late Paleozoic Alleghenian orogeny, what is now northwestern Africa was sutured to Laurentia, forming the supercontinent of Pangaea. This suture zone is currently thought to be the location where Pangaea subsequently broke apart. However, the recent discovery by Kuiper and others in 2017 of a fragment of northwestern African crust on the Georges Bank in offshore Massachusetts, based on detrital zircon data from a drill core, suggests that the Pangaean suture zone lies to the northwest of the Georges Bank on the continental shelf or on land. This work presents the results of laser ablation inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry uranium-lead analysis on igneous and inherited zircon from meta-igneous and igneous samples and detrital zircon from metasedimentary samples to test whether southeastern New England, the southeastern part of what is currently interpreted as Avalon terrane, may instead be part of the aforementioned northwestern African crustal fragment. This diagram shows in the basement rock in red, there are zircons and then igneous zircons in blue. The blue and red zircons form when magma incorporates these older basement zircons as cores, and then younger igneous zircons form rims around these older cores. The detrital zircons are shown in yellow, eroding and depositing in sedimentary units. Samples were analyzed at the Boise State Isotope Geology Lab. The research area in southeastern New England covers southeastern Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and southeastern Connecticut. Analyzed samples were collected in the locations shown here, with metasedimentary detrital samples in purple, dark purple, and meta-igneous or igneous samples shown in light purple. This area was chosen because of a lack of definitive evidence for tectonic provenance within the research area. Studies to the north show Avalonian detrital zircon signatures, but existing data within the research area are only rock types and Ediacaran Pluton ages. Both of these could be characteristic for either Avalonian or West African rocks. The methodology of determining tectonic provenance involves comparing the analyzed sample dates to known age signatures from the two target areas, Avalonia and West Africa. Detrital zircon data has been compiled for both areas from many different samples, many different studies. And these are representative relative probability plots for each. Things to note are that both samples have large Ediacaran peaks and at least some grains, if not a peak, in the Paleoproterozoic and into the Archean. However, the Avalonian samples have small peaks all throughout the Mesoproterozoic, and the Western African samples have an age gap during this time here. Detrital signatures from our samples, I'll show later on, are compared to these signatures with at least 117 concordant or accurate dates to make a statistically relevant sample. The goal of the inherited cores was also to find enough cores to be able to make a plot like this to compare to these signatures. Here are the results. Lab or field photos of the igneous samples. Lab photos are from the drill cores, and field photos of the outcrop samples prior to being crushed and processed for mineral separation of zircons. And igneous, here are the probability density plots. The igneous samples were not conclusive, with very few inherited cores found. Those that were found were all Neoproterozoic and relatively close in age to the overall Ediacaran igneous ages, which all of these big peaks are all Ediacaran ages. And so these could be either Avalonian or West African rocks. One sample, 330, did have a couple of older dates, but there were only 6 dates in total, which is not enough to be conclusive. And there are, again, some Ediacaran dates in there too. Here are the field photos from the detrital samples. The detrital samples, probability density plots here, they were much more interesting, yielding 5 samples that look very Avalonian, this one, and then these 4. One sample only yielded 13 dates, right here, and most were ediacaran, which was not enough to be conclusive. There's one older date, but it's just not enough. 2 samples have signatures that look much more like West Africa, although they're not quite a perfect match. Here are the plots of my samples in white compared to the compiled Avalonia and West Africa signatures in yellow and green, respectively. The top 5 samples look very Avalonian, but these bottom 2 samples do not. They have a large ediacaran peak right there, as to be expected, but this second peak at about 740 million years is unexpected. Neither Avalonia nor West Africa have a peak at this age. It falls on the older edge of the West African peak. You know, there's a few grains there, but it's not a large separate peak, so that's really quite unexpected. If these 2 unknown samples are West African, there could be sediment derived from, for this peak, derived from the Bouazer complex in the Anti-Atlas Mountains of Morocco, which has 740 to 750 million year old igneous rocks that have been dated. But if these rocks are Avalonia, the source for the 740 grains could potentially be sediment from the Blackstone group, which lies within the research area. However, the igneous rocks from this group have not been dated. This is just speculation, but this group is lithologically quite similar to the to the Burin group, which is about 760 million years old in Newfoundland. Looking at the map, the Blackstone group here that I just mentioned is circled in red. The dark purple dots now are the analyzed detrital samples that have an Avalonian signature, and the 2 unknown detrital samples are there in red, with light purple being the inconclusive igneous samples. So there are subterranes recognized within the Avalon terrane, as shown on this very simplified map here. The red portions here are intruded granites, and the tan is overlying basins. These are the same as the yellow and the brown on this map back here, or this brown. But the 3 subterranes are in blue, yellow, and green, with the green being the Bulgur Marsh subterrane. This includes the location of the 2 unknown samples here in southern Rhode Island. The other samples taken from within this subterrane were all igneous, so they were inconclusive. But we're going to get into this subterrane a little bit more. So if these unknown samples from southern Rhode Island are West African, the Pangaean suture zone would lie between these samples and the analyzed Avalonian ones, perhaps underlying the Narragansett Basin. So perhaps the suggested Bulgur Marsh terrane from the previous slide is actually a piece of West African crust left over from the breakup of Pangaea, which would mean that this suture zone would lie potentially right through there underneath the Narragansett Basin. However, these samples could also be Avalonian, and the Avalon terrane could just be much more complex than we previously thought. It's already suggested to be a composite terrane with subterranes, and the Bulgur Marsh subterrane itself could just be very complex and require further study. I would like to thank the National Science Foundation, who funded my research, as well as some of the excellent lab staff that I've worked with, and the USGS and Joint Base Cape Cod for the drill samples that they provided that we analyzed. Here are a few key references. Thank you so much for watching my presentation.